Welcome to In the Process. In this episode, I have a close friend of mine here, Duygu Daniels. Hi, Duygu. Welcome.
Hey, Amit, how are you?
Good to see you. Duygu, thanks for joining us today. I'm very happy to have you here because we've known each other for many years now, and there's a lot about you that I admire, and that's why I'm very excited today that others get to listen to your story as well. Before we dive in, Duygu, I will share a couple words about how I know you.
I want to say that I'm honored to be here and thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. So, Duygu, you and I met through Sarah, my wife, several years back. Ever since Duygu's been part of the family. In fact, she initiated our wedding. So I'll leave it there in terms of how
It
things
was
played
so
out.
beautiful.
And you did a great job. So just a bit about Duygu, and then I'll pass it on to Duygu. Duygu is a senior software designer. She's worked for many years in New York City and Silicon Valley and is now based in Austin, Texas. Feel free to add anything.
Oh, I'm going to definitely be adding lots of y'alls now that I live in Texas. It'll be fun.
Yes, and well, Duygu, what we want to talk about today is your story because it's been a very, I know, diverse and rich experience in life for you so far, living in different countries, different cultures. So why don't we start there? Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I was born in the capital of Turkey, Ankara, and we immigrated to the US when I was 2 years old. I spent most of my first sort of childhood years in the US, in New York, and then we moved back to Turkey for middle school and high school. And then I came back for college. And then I met an American gentleman. We ended up getting married, so I stayed. But I go back to Turkey very often.
I think the angle that I am most interested in, and I would assume anyone listening to this later will be as well, is kind of what shaped you. Take us all the way back as far as you like and bring us to today. What shaped the Duygu Daniels that is sitting in front of me today?
I think pretty early on, I was very obsessed with computers. It's a very interesting story of how I used to always admire people who were doctors or who were lawyers who really knew what they wanted from a young age and ended up there. I never thought that was my personal story, but only in hindsight I realized as I'm working on a memoir actually that's exactly the case for me as well. I was very much obsessed since a young age, and it all started actually with my uncle bringing his Commodore to my grandparents' house, one of the earlier models, 1985, I think, and he put it on the floor, and I was so excited I like crawled over and like started banging on the keyboard. And at some point, of course, they were worried I was going to break it, so they took it away, and I started bawling, just crying my eyes out, just really, really sad. And then they decided to, like, they had to figure something out because I was inconsolable. So they brought in my grandfather's old typewriter and they convinced me, like, 1 year old Duygu, to that this typewriter is actually the more advanced model and I should play with this. So I like played with that and I never really thought about it, but the rest is kind of history. And then I taught myself how to code and made my first website when I was about 10 years old. I learned sort of the basics of HTML and started making fan pages. My favorite bands, including the Spice Girls. So by middle school and high school, I was working on CSS and HTML, and I was making sort of my, just what are basically like what do you call the fan Instagram, fan Twitter X accounts. I would do that, but as websites. And then my father installed a bootleg version of Photoshop on my computer. And that was a kind of a turning point. I had taken up photography right around then, using whatever I could get my hands on. And I'd upload it to Photoshop and start editing. So then I slowly started to become more interested in graphic design. Once sort of the graphic design and the website coding fireworks, all the tools kind of came together, I began to make websites for other people and small businesses in town. I went to high school in a small town, Yalova, south of Istanbul, about like an hour south of Istanbul. And then I came to the US for college. Once I got here, I wanted to study something that was creative, but my dad basically said that he would not pay for my college if I studied anything besides business. He had this vision of me as a business person. And I had to kind of, go with it because that was the only way I could go to college. So I started the business classes in undergrad. And the first time I hit like the first round of really difficult classes in math and sciences, I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do that. I need to find a way. I need to find a creative way to be able to like convince this man to let me be. So I asked if, first I asked like, okay, can I study graphic design? I was intimidated by software engineering. So I proposed graphic design and he said, absolutely not. No way. Okay, so what can I find that's going to be kind of like a middle ground? So something that will he'll be okay with. It's business enough, but there's a creative aspect of it. So I literally went to the website of my university and looked through like majors like that could like fit both of us. And I found fashion studies, textiles. I was like, perfect. My dad was in textiles in the 90s and here's my opportunity. So I pitched him, okay, look at all these business classes I have to take for this major. And he agreed. So I was able to study fashion, which was a very interesting experience. I was making more money on the side, making websites and taking headshots for the theater kids in college. But at some point I had to start to do some internships for my fashion studies program. So my peers started to apply to, Chanel and Bloomingdale's and Victoria's Secret, and I just wasn't interested. I also needed to make money to be able to, make a living because I wasn't getting a lot of discretionary income besides what my parents were paying for college tuition. So I ended up through someone I know getting this really sort of technical work in textiles, which are called mümessil in Turkish, jobbers. And in the 50th floor of the Empire State Building, I work for this company that basically sells fabrics wholesale. So it wasn't glamorous at all. My peers were sitting like, 10th row in fashion shows. And I was kind of like just like cutting fabrics and making swatches and that kind of thing. But I was getting paid. So I was really happy about that. Yeah. And then, I assumed I would continue my career in textiles and maybe, have this relationship with Turkey and be a bridge between the two countries. And then everything took a turn extremely unexpectedly. My mom got diagnosed with cancer and she passed away in about 6 months, which led my father and my sister, who was 7 years old at the time, to move back to Turkey to be able to be closer to my grandparents. So then I'm in college. Now I'm kind of by myself. The sort of direction I had from my father's gone. I have a little bit more freedom. I have a little bit more depression. So, kind of processing all of that, kind of kept going and then decided to pause school. So I paused school and went back to Turkey to be able to be with my family a little bit. And during one of those pauses, I did this twice, I was really interested in just jumping right in to starting my own company. I had these like visions of just like working with people that I care about on things that I care about. So my friend Jem and I, Jem is CEM is his name. We became pretty close and started to design these graphic t-shirts, these really high-end graphic t-shirts. And we built a clothing line. So back then, mid to late 2000s, graphic t-shirts were just kind of becoming a thing, elevated t-shirts. We jumped on that bandwagon and started to sell online and with retailers. We found a manufacturer. We had a great relationship with them. They generously funded us. And then we kind of got some coverage. We got some coverage in Turkey. We got some success for our age. And then I made the mistake of shipping some samples to a well-known American retailer. They put in an order. It was great. I thought, this is it. We could really start something here because this US retailer is interested. And then a few weeks later, my friend sent me a screenshot of a graphic T-shirt essentially that is very much reminiscent of ours, and to basically from the same retailer. So we got knocked off pretty early on, but that was kind of a testament to our, you know, innovative designs. Anyway, so I had some pressure from family to finish college and get a degree. I really didn't want to, but I was kind of shipped back, and I finished school eventually. And then I basically needed a visa. So this is the classic sort of first generation immigrant story. I needed a visa after my student visa expired. And I thought, okay, what better way to try to get a visa than to work for an immigration lawyer? It's like connecting A and B in a straight line, you know? So I started to help this immigration lawyer with her nonprofit and doing some social media work for her, design work for her, and even doing some paralegal like work on the side, like really low level. And she really like milked me to whatever I had to offer because, you know, I was like young, energized, and extremely cheap. So then in one of those days, after having done so many, you know, meticulous, labor intensive work for her, I went to an event with her at a Turkish tech mixer. And for some reason, I had sort of this like opportunity to chat with Murat Aktahanoğlu, who's a VC in New York City, who's now specializes in climate. And I was talking to Murat and I told him my story. And once I mentioned my story to him, he, in his signature smirk and seriousness, was like, "What are you doing? You should be in tech." I never considered that as a possibility. There was no one like me in these companies that I would admire. I didn't see myself, I didn't see that as a possibility, but Murat's really right there and then, like, you know, opened up a whole world for me. And that's how it all began, basically.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot in there that hits pretty hard. I guess, first of all, the one about at the age of 10, starting to like develop websites, and that's just surreal. You know, I don't think there's many people like that.
You'd be surprised what you're capable of doing when you're like obsessed with a band at that age.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the Spice Girls. Yeah, it's good to remember them as well. They did have a big impact on our generation. Thank you for sharing your story, Duygu. I know there's some pretty vulnerable points in there, and you know, you openly shared them with us. There's a lot of passion there. This, you know, just play back at you kind of a little bit what I heard. You know, there's the kind of noticing your passion at an early age, negotiating your stakeholders like your father around, you know, making sure you continue to progress, but keep your passion as well in your life. There's a lot of twists and turns and obviously shocking experiences. But if you were to connect all the dots of the different chapters in that story, what do you think is that one red thread that connects them all for you?
It's definitely curiosity and a passion for wanting to put something out there, create something, and keep moving. I didn't have a lot of blockages around, I think, what's possible and what's not, because even though I was raised by the internet, I was not raised by the social internet. It was all just me and people like myself who were making things, creating things, and putting it out there. We weren't discussing anything besides really what we were making and what we were interested in. And there wasn't a lot of information coming our way. So we had, I think, a clarity of thought that maybe younger folks struggle with nowadays. So within that clarity of thought, within that context, I was able to really follow my curiosity and what I was interested in. Even though there was a lot of people who, you know, said I was very idealistic and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like running a mile a minute, like trying different things. But because they also didn't understand what I was doing, I had that benefit of like, they don't even get me. They don't understand like what I'm doing in front of the computer for hours. My friends would come in and like try to get me to go out, and I'd be like, okay, hold that thought. Give me 2 hours. I'll be right there, you know? And then, I was able to just really follow what I felt like. It was just a feeling.
So I want to dig a bit deeper into that. It was just a feeling. Can you
Mm.
explain that a little bit? Because it kept you going and you didn't give up. What was that feeling like, especially at a young age? How did you notice it? How did you leverage it?
I think from a young age, I was very emotional,
Hmm.
and I was aware that I was emotional. Also, because my name is Duygu, which translates to emotions in Turkish. So when someone calls me, they're always reminding me of feelings and emotions, consciously or subconsciously. And I think a lot of people with this name might and because I was always very emotional, I had to kind of learn to live my emotions inside of myself without, bringing them out too much. Also because I had tough parents, and when I would do that, I would get a lot of pushback. The world would immediately be like, "Stop, stop, you know, don't express your emotions." So I knew I was emotional, so I had to express them to myself, or else I would go nuts. So I basically used art and creativity to be able to put stuff out there so that it can mirror itself back to me. How I feel could be mirrored back to me. So I used art, used my creativity as a friend. And as I did this, I allowed myself to go into, due to lack of a better term, the void, a place that's very, that could be very dark, but it's also a place that, I could be really intimate with myself and to be able to really understand how I'm feeling, what I want. So I spent a lot of time in the void, quote unquote, which means not a lot of sharing, not a lot of talking, not a lot of consuming. That came later on in my life. In the first half of my young life, I was spending a lot of time by myself, getting to know myself.
Just as you speak, quite naturally, because I'm human, obviously everything you tell me, I'm right now kind of mirroring that into my life and how I grew up.
Of course.
My name is not emotional or Duygu, emotion, but Ümit, but I'm, as you know, very emotional as well. And I think as you spoke, something that came to my mind was there's a huge difference we all know now at a certain age between being emotional and being emotionally intelligent, mastering your emotions versus being controlled by them. So I think that's one thing. And the other one that I wanted to play back at you is at such a young age, actually doing the work internally. I mean, at that age, I was out on the football fields and whatever, constantly talking, shouting, while instead of like sitting down and actually writing things down and processing, which obviously at some point I had to process. So thanks for sharing, Duygu. So that brings me to my next point, because I know this is now my view of Duygu, but let me know if that resonates and we can take it from there. I know what you do in life and the things you've done, the experiences you described is kind of one dimension. But I know, and you started hinting at it, at another dimension, Duygu, which is the more kind of spiritual and, awareness and a connection with yourself and, kind of the deep inner work. You are really far ahead. Can you describe that dimension, that level? How did that level develop for you? And kind of where are you right now on that level in life?
I don't think I willingly developed it or consciously developed it. It's because when life gives you affliction and lots of affliction at a young age, I had very serious issues with my parents, violence. I was a survivor of the earthquake in 1990. What was it, 8, 9? I refuse to archive things in my memory, for instance, for that reason. Like I won't be able to kind of archive things like normal people do. So that also helps me to be able to like stay in the present and stay in the void when need be.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of affliction in my life, and there's nothing that grows a person more than pain and difficulty. Uh, I think what I might have done a little different is I'm very obsessive in that I'll like grab the thing I want to know about and I won't let it go. I'll go down the rabbit hole. So when depression hit, or when I was very, very, mentally at a tough place for a good portion of my life, but I just wouldn't let it go. I wouldn't be like, okay, this is This is how it is. It's very normal that we have these mental health issues. It's very normal to da 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 da, which I completely agree. But I didn't accept that. It was like, I'm going to find, no matter how long it takes me, how to get through this. So I always go down the rabbit hole when life gives me lemons. I don't make lemonade. Still can't make lemonade. Hopefully one day I'll be able to. But when life gives me lemons, I really squeeze out every single juice, every single drop, to be able to understand what it is and how I can use it. Not always in a way that's nourishing, not always in a way that's lemonade that's going to feed others and myself, but I just won't let it go.
Yeah, and I think that kind of to me links back to the little bit of the passion and curiosity you described earlier when taking us through your story. You now mentioned staying in the void 2 or 3 times, and I want to catch on to that one because I think it's a powerful way of describing it, because I personally also just went through staying through the void, and now this podcast is called In the Process for a reason, because we're all evolving. Our stories are continuing to unfold through life, and it's about leadership that we're trying to talk here. So I want to kind of bring those two together, if that's okay for you. What did you learn about leadership, especially in those periods of exposing yourself and staying in that void?
I think the most solid connection one can make is caring. Caring is very difficult to describe and very difficult to ignite on its own. You kind of either have it or you don't. But the moment you feel a spark inside of yourself, you have to run with it and develop it. That spark, there's a Arabic word for it. It's hima, and it means it's this natural burning desire inside of you that you don't ignite. It's not affected by anything. It's just this desire that you have that you can't explain really where it comes from. And I think in terms of leadership, I think leaders naturally have that as well. They have this desire that they can't quite explain where it's coming from, that they have to act on. They have to go out into the world and care for people, inspire people, move groups of people, be that sort of energy for them. And I think it all starts with that himma, that burning, natural burning sensation in our bodies. When I hit the spark, when I'm in the void, I never let that spark go. I always have to put logs so that the fire starts to keep burning. Because if I don't, that's when I go into the darkness. That's where I spiral. That's where I lose myself. But that place inside of me, as long as I take care of it and I feel aligned and I connect it with the greater universe, I feel very alive, and I always prefer to move from that place.
So there's an element of being able to step into that void to actually notice that spark. I think that's beautiful.
And I think great leaders really see that in people. They notice that a person has that spark or has that burning fire, and they help them continue to grow it, maintain it, sustain it, and channel it. I think that's what really differentiates between leaders and leaders, right? Like that caring and that sort of nurturing, as well as self-awareness.
Yeah, and the word caring is a big word. What do you really care about is a tough question to answer, especially in a very noisy world. So connecting the two, because that void was a powerful metaphor, and I wanted to see how you connect that with leadership. And how, Duygu, how has your view or your definition of leadership evolved through the course of your life? Because I mean, we're not born with here's leadership and here's how we're going to do it in life, right? We kind of get to know the concept of leadership as life evolves. What was that like for you?
So I was more subject to leadership. I experienced leadership during the companies that I founded, and I experienced leadership in my studies. I love to study theology and philosophy, and I study a lot of leaders. I don't think about leadership in and of itself as a separate concept, because my psyche always pushes me towards the group. For me, a leader is a member of a group. They're nothing more and nothing less on a very base level. I personally think that you can have a group without a leader, but you can't have a leader without a group. So it all starts from a leader's building blocks, which is the group itself, and the leader being a part of that group. Here, I think the most important aspect that I've seen, studied, experienced is there a bond between the group members? Even if the leader has come in later on, doesn't matter. When the leader does come in, is there an invisible bond that connects everybody? That invisible bond happens through relationships, happens through caring, and happens through a strong vision and self-awareness. So I tend to think about a leader within a group. And so I like to recenter my thoughts to the group.
How do you relate that to the business world you've experienced? What have you seen works? What have you seen was missing?
I can speak for Silicon Valley because that's where I spent the last decade. And I think in the beginning, during social 2.0 within the businesses, I saw a lot of creativity. I can't speak for the .com era, but I would say I caught the tail end of it maybe. But there was a lot of genuine curiosity and creativity and passion, and people coming into the industry purely out of these sort of callings. They just were so drawn to it. They really enjoyed it. Career and money, I would say, from what I've seen, came secondary. No one really thought about being a software engineer. No one really thought about being a designer. Like, you just kind of were into computers. You were into technology. You were into fringe technology. You were just curious about it. So you went in and you built a career, and that career happened to end up becoming a very important one in society right now. So during that era, I don't think there was a need as much for perhaps like management and leadership as we study it today, because everyone was just kind of dancing together. You know, when you dance, a leader is really important depending on what type of dance you do, but things kind of flow because there's a degree of passion and creativity involved. I think as we lost that, and I'm very sad about this. I could talk about this for hours. But once we start to lose the creativity and the passion, and companies start to really just copy one another, I think that's when we really need to start to have structures. We needed like ways to be able to manage companies as the companies grew and grew and grew. Of course, there's always going to be a need, but something changed where I think leadership now is more important than ever, because someone needs to teach us how to dance. I'm hoping, that the creativity at some point comes back, and we get to play by ear a little bit more.
Yeah, it's I think the way you describe it, when people actually come together in the beginning, the expression of dancing together was powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking here literally dancing, right? We're talking being in that kind of flow with each other and co-creating. So with all of this in mind, if you look at the world we're in right now, top down, how do you see the role of leaders today?
I would say two things. One, developing self-awareness. The younger generations coming in are very interested in this topic. They care a lot about self-awareness. And to be able to actually manage them and have a good relationship, our leaders are going to need to have self-awareness more than ever. This means awareness of physical well-being, spiritual well-being, mental well-being. I think this is the number one topic for people interested in being leaders. And then the second thing is having a very clear vision for themselves and for the future of society, a self-vision where they see themselves, what type of feelings they want out of their own life, and then consequently expanding that to understand what type of vibes they want from the society around them. And then in that context, kind of developing a vision. How do we get there? What do we do? and then working backwards.
Awareness, vision, and I think the last one is agency or action, right? So what? Yeah. It's interesting because the three things you just mentioned for leaders, they kind of link back also to what we discussed at the beginning of our conversation. I'm still on the void. I love the void.
It's very powerful. It's a very powerful place to be. I would highly recommend everyone to spend at least 10, 15 minutes a day in the void.
Because it feels like, Duygu, a lot of leaders skip the awareness bit, go straight to vision, straight to action, and then wonder, why is no one following? Or why is there resistance? Thanks for reminding us, Duygu.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening.
So as we now wrap up, there's a final question that I always ask, and I want to ask you as well. If you could leave the audience or anyone listening to this podcast with one message, what would it be?
I would say protect yourself from information. I don't think we should label information coming in as useful and positive anymore. It's going to be harder and harder to discern between what's useful, what's not, and it's just going to be very detrimental to our health and our self-actualization. So I would really encourage people to take a look at where information is coming to them and how they can minimize that. And then that's when it's going to be easier to sit in the void, process things, and find your spark.
Thank you, Duygu. Great message that connects it all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing your story.
Thanks so much, Amy.
Excellent. Well, I hope this was useful for your own process and look forward to seeing you in future episodes.